On Tuesday, after the election results came in, several things were on my mind all at once. Dick Cheney is dead as fuck.
Luca! Bueno?
Zoran Mamdani was elected to be the first Democratic Socialist and Muslim to be the mayor of New York City.
So that's cool, I guess.
And best of all, Richard Levy Ward lost the Bangor City Council race. While the rest of the country is going wild over Zoran Mamdani's election victory, while reveling in MAGA and the Democratic establishment collectively crashing out into a hilarious media spectacle that would make Joe McCarthy bust a nut, I have been blessed with a gift from the cosmos. I get to revel in Dick Ward's crash out. But he didn't just lose, he landed his sweet ass in last place. He got 555 total votes. Now, there are two ways to look at that number. On the one hand, he obviously got last place, and that's a certified platinum tier meme for the ages. But on the other hand, 555 total votes is concerning. Think about that for a second. Richard Ward lives in a group home situation, so his scope of influence was with the people in his group home and whoever else his predatory internet presence can reach. He's also got family that supported his efforts, like his father. I'm sorry, but you have to see this.
Respectfully, what is the specific point you are trying to make with this picture?
I was checking out a gun show, and guns are cool.
They are. Thanks for the reply. Heck, I'm his dad, and I think they are. Guessing you have a vagina. Nope. Hanging Johnson here, man.
His father is just casually interested in Michael's genitals, seemingly out of fucking nowhere. Michael asked a pretty fair question, and to Junior's credit, he gave a perfectly acceptable answer. There was no reason for his dad to come in and ask if Michael had a vagina. That is absolutely disturbing. His dad is an interesting fellow. Here's Daddy making a death threat to Portland, Maine when his son used to live there and ran for office then too.
When something happens to him cause you don't like him and make up lies. Won't be hard for me to find out who you are. It's my child. Portland, best pray he don't get hurt. He is an activist exercising free speech. Well, the demo rats don't like free speech, so they're gonna use their freedoms to do the same. Only difference is if they get him hurt, I will raise that place.
Well, the so-called demo rats have been using freedom of speech to protest the ongoing genocide in Palestine at the hands of Israel. But neither Dad nor his son ever seemed to advocate for Mahmoud Khalil, who was detained by the Trump administration for non-violently protesting at Columbia University. His son is famously anti-Semitic, as we went over in the first video, and even uses Israel as a means to drive that anti-Semitism home. So why has father or son never mentioned Mahmoud Khalil as an example of free speech being violated?
Get me names of the ones you think are responsible for this flyer, and I will take care of the rest. But any name you give me will go in my book for future reasons. Maybe I just want to give them a cookie. Don't do it here. I will call later.
Okay, so that's definitely a death threat. I have no reason to believe that he's making a list of people just to give them a cookie, and who knows what hypothetical cookie could be laced with. Daddy gives me mass shooter vibes, but just based on this one interaction, we can clearly see that he is a disturbed individual. If I had to assume the reason that he inquired about Michael's genitals, I believe that Daddy was doing some tests to see if Michael was man enough for his son's presence. It wouldn't surprise me if there were like a philocentric complex going on here. Whatever makes Daddy proud of his dipshit Nazi son, I guess. But Richard Levy Ward still got 555 votes, which is an insane amount. I believe that people underestimate the danger Richard Levy Ward poses on our community. Many people dismiss his fringe Nazi beliefs as like he's a harmless fly. Just don't listen to him. That's fine and all. But must I remind you that he ran for office twice now? Even if 555 is a small number compared to the scope of the election, it still means there are 555 people who are either uninformed of Richard Ward's past, or they outwardly support Richard's hateful bullshit and policy ideas. But let's take a look at one of Richard Ward's strategies this previous campaign, because it will become important later. Here is one of his slogans: homeless before refugees.
You is a bastard, stupid bastard.
Refugees are homeless. That's the entire point. The United States empire has invaded countless Latin American countries, overthrowing governments, installing puppet dictators, and forcing those nations' laws to serve United States corporate interests. It's obliterated their infrastructure and livelihoods, draining their resources for your peckerwood ass. So yeah, they end up without homes. That's why they migrate here. Colonized people flee to the United States because our imperialist government plunders their resources through non-stop expansionist violence. I highly suggest my audience read How Europe Underdeveloped Africa by Walter Rodney to learn more about this heinous capitalist history. But come on now, folks. Can you imagine Richard Ward volunteering with a mutual aid group, only giving food to people he personally decides look white enough? Look, Dick Ward, there's a reason socialists talk about one big union, because working class material conditions affect everyone. That's how, capitalism works, idiot. And what did he ever do for the unhoused community of Bangor? There are multiple mutual aid groups across Bangor who regularly supply food, medical supplies, heating pads, blankets, coffee, socks, underwear, Narcan, containers, and most of all, massive hearts of gold. Bangor's activist scene isn't perfect, but the people on the ground do incredible work on top of advocacy work at town halls. Let's take a look at a recent event where Richard Levy Ward spoke. Watch how Ward attempts to string together his sentences and overall talking points.
Hello, my name is Richard Ward, City Council candidate, live in Bangor. First, I'd like to warn the City Council that cutting public comments from public meetings is violating their constitutional rights. The Supreme Court has ruled that even hate speech is protected speech. A man in Los Angeles sued and won $215,000 when he was silenced by the City Council. Do you want Bangor to be held accountable for silencing speech they don't like? I urge you to follow the law and honor speakers' constitutional rights. To the callers that are listening on Zoom, if the city continues to censor you, reach out to me and the Foundation for Individual Rights and Freedom and Expression.
Don't forget about how Richard Ward opened his speech here, because we will address this part later.
I want to address a troubling trend and propose a path forward that prioritizes real solutions over weakness. We've seen a rise in leftist violence, riots, vandalism, and intimidation tactics aimed at silencing the truth.
Notice how Ward uses a vague phrase, the truth.
Riots, vandalism, and intimidation tactics aimed at silencing the truth.
This overarching so-called truth is never defined and is left for the listener of his speech to fill in the blanks. Of course, the intent here is for Ward to use the rest of his speech as substance for his subjectively defined truth.
Witnessing the murder of Charlie Kirk and how the leftists cheered with glee proved to me that we are not the same. He was a man that voiced his opinion and opportunity for debate. While I don't agree with everything he said, I realized he was a mild-mannered intellectual. They don't celebrate because they are strong, but because they are weak and have little in life to enjoy. If they will take Charlie Kirk's life and celebrate, they'll do the same for you if you dare hold views that they offend them.
It's funny hearing Ward talk about leftists like they're so bloodthirsty for violence that we celebrate the death of random people for no reason when Ward himself is a Nazi. Like an actual Nazi, not in a vacuum, not as a pejorative. He is a real Sieg-heiling Nazi. He doesn't want you to know that he is a Nazi because he is a coward.
The left labels anyone who doesn't agree with them a racist, a Nazi, a homophobe, a transphobe, etc.
And as for Charlie Kirk, he was literally asking for it.
You will never live in a society when you have an armed citizenry and you won't have a single gun death. That is nonsense. It's drivel. But I think it's worth it. I think it's worth to have a cost of, unfortunately, some gun deaths every single year so that we can have the Second Amendment to protect our other God-given rights. That is a prudent deal. It is rational.
Charlie Kirk fuels stochastic terrorism against vulnerable people, much like Ward does. I mean, Charlie Kirk even sent buses to the Capitol on January 6th. So for Ward to talk about how violent the left is without acknowledging Charlie Kirk's own assistance in violence is disingenuous. Anyway, Richard Ward is just doing his usual scaremongering tactic. He's trying to paint the left as some mythical, scary, evil entity without elaborating what he means. He never mentions the mutual aid organizations in Bangor like Greater Bangor Houseless Collective, Needlepoint Sanctuary, or even the guy sitting right next to him, who is a major water protector advocate, fighting tirelessly to stop the pollution of the very Penobscot River that Richard Ward lives right next to. But I digress, because remember in my last video about Richard Ward, where I said that Richard Ward wanted free speech for his own dumb bullshit? In a vacuum, it's a fair request to keep the Zoom calls on for callers who aren't able to make it to these town hall meetings. Councilmember Michael Beck knows full well that the bus system is underfunded, which means less drivers, which means buses close at 6 p.m. and on the weekend, which means a lot of people have to either walk in the barely walkable Bangor City urban layout, assuming they're not confined to a wheelchair like many Bangor residents are, or they're stuck at home with an inaccessible city government. So the importance of the Zoom calls is massive. But remember, we know that Richard Ward isn't standing up for free speech absolutism. He is advocating for unchecked hate speech. You'll notice that later in the hearing, someone makes an offhand comment about the Zoom calls.
Anyway, thank you very much, and I appreciate all you do. And I do want to say, please don't limit the Zoom people. I think we should not be afraid of, be intimidated enough to disenfranchise a lot of citizens in Bangor. Even though I don't agree with a lot of what was just said, I certainly agree with that little piece. And that's probably the only piece. Thank you.
This would imply that at some point in the past, the Zoom call feature was being abused. Now, I don't want to give the City Council too much of the benefit of the doubt, because there is a real potential for legitimate censorship to occur, especially of the City Council's constituents. But I'm pretty sure that this is part of Dick Wart's strategy. Remember in the first video when we went over a news report where someone planted Easter eggs with racist flyers all over the local park? Well, in the same news report, the father said this.
He posted the flyer on social media, but instead of being met with equally shocked comments, he says many users agreed with the message. People leaving comments like, "What exactly is the racist part?" And, "Thank God someone is finally willing to speak the truth."
Well, would you look at that? The video itself is flooded with racist comments. Keep in mind, the News Center Maine on YouTube barely gets any viewership. So for this video to get this much attention out of nowhere is very interesting. We're actually going to return to this news report later, as new information has been revealed regarding Richard Ward's involvement. But for now, just keep in mind that something happened before Richard Ward was given the chance to speak. And while we don't see what took place, either because it was deleted or removed, we can safely assume that whatever they were doing was disruptive against decorum. But when Richard Ward signals to Zoom callers to reach out to him if they continues to get censored, do you think he's telling that to regular Bangor residences?
To the callers that are listening on Zoom, if the city continues to censor you, reach out to me.
I doubt it. In my opinion, I believe that he is signaling to his online, most likely out-of-state, white supremacist circle. We will talk more about that later. Right now, I want to show you a man by the name of French Toast.
I am French Toast. I live here in the dirt, on these streets of Bangor. You all take care of me. You all know me. Most of you all know me. I'm French Toast. We got a little problem with needles all over the place. We got a little problem with the parks. We got a little problem with people kicking us out of the parks. When we have, we walk through these parks every day, You can't SS me out of a park. Well, I'm French Toast, baby. I live in these parks. You can't SS me out of the park. So a cop kicks me in the foot. That's assault, by the way. By the way, that's assault. That's assault. And I don't think that any of this should be going on because I think we all have rights. We all have rights, okay? Even though we live in these parks and there's people sleeping in these parks and they're pushing us all out of the way, they're pushing us all out of this and they're pushing us all out of this, you guys got to understand something. We've got nowhere to go. I've been on the streets 19 years. I got nowhere to go. I love these people. I love these people. I help these people. I clean these parks up. I clean up these needles. I clean up all this stuff, I clean up all this stuff. I clean up all this stuff. I bring bags with me. You guys don't understand. You guys got to understand something. We've got rights, okay? You can't kick us out of the parks. You cannot kick us out of the parks. Just by signing some SS order and give me a piece of paper. You know what? You know what? This is America, baby.
French Toast has a way with words, but he's laying it thick on the city council. He's speaking both from experience and with actual rudimentary knowledge of his own community of people, which he cares about. He's talking about being harassed by the police at the parks, while people in his position have nowhere else to go. I almost forgot about Jenna Jones, Bangor's two-faced gentrifier who shut down Camp Hope last winter. We haven't forgotten. Check out my video on Jenna Jones to learn more about her so-called housing vouchers that unhoused residents said were completely invalid and unusable. But not only was Richard Ward laughing in the background while this guy is advocating for his dignity, but this is supposedly the guy that ran on homeless before refugees.
This is a strategic solution to the human and public health crisis currently plaguing our city. The immediate repurposing of the Bangor Armory as a centralized emergency shelter and social hub. This move is a multi-layered intervention that solves numerous problems at once. Morally, we provide a warm, safe, day and night space for our most vulnerable citizens, addressing the moral imperative to care for every resident.
Once again, this is proving my point that the Bangor community is more in tune with its own unhoused community and not Richard Ward. But why the homeless before refugees slogan to begin with? Clearly, Ward doesn't give a shit about struggles unhoused people deal with, such as state violence, recovering from addiction, or trying to avoid starvation and the cold. You'll notice that in Richard Ward's rhetoric, that he will sometimes mention disability advocacy. Now, disability advocacy is absolutely necessary. The fact that our world is so inaccessible, and yet our government continues to make life harder for people with disabilities, is a sign of cruelty as the status quo. However, Ward's supremacist leader, neck pussy Donald J. Trump, attacked SNAP and Medicaid. He's the biggest enemy to people with disabilities as it is. We'll put a pin in this as we move on to Richard Ward's Facebook upon discovering that he lost the election again.
We battled relentlessly to shelter the homeless and reclaim Bangor from madness, only for the degenerate electorate to install a gutless communist, a rabid anti-white murderer, and a never America first narcissist. Revel in the fallout. Filthy syringes carpeting every sidewalk, savage migrant rape gangs prowling unchecked, and a flood of tyrannical lawsuits for crushing free speech in your own city hall. Civility and deference are dead, buried by a majority hell-bent on exterminating you and your bloodline. We don't need a majority to win, but a tireless minority that will stand up and counter left-wing violence. Counter protest pride events. Speak during public comment at city meetings. Flyer neighborhoods with shocking facts supplied by GTVFLYERS.com. Cower in silence, groveling for the state's table scraps, or unleash everything you can in defiance liberally and lovingly. Resist with at every turn. Join the front lines with unbreakable nationalist legions like the Goyim Defense League and National Alliance and the New England White Network. White survival demands it. No retreat, no surrender. Mark 2026. We return for the State House to defend white working families, the poor and the disabled against the anti-white regime.
Hey Richard, what about thank you to everyone who voted for me and supported my campaign? I know that you're a shit-for-brain Nazi, but at least be a little bit diplomatic when crashing out on Facebook. Jesus fucking Christ. Secondly, this is some serious cope. This is the kind of whining that only losers make. Notice how in the first paragraph, Ward uses descriptors like gutless communist, a rabid anti-white murderer, and a never America first narcissist. Well, he's referring to Angela Walker.
The positive side of communist of winning Bangor is they will definitely silence free speech and make lawsuits easier. Flood City Council with free speech. Contact FIRE and file a lawsuit. They can't shut down in-person public comment.
He is complaining about Angela Walker, who was convicted of murdering a man who was violently harassing her while using an anti-Native American slur. I guess it makes sense that Richard Ward would take issue with this elected official, considering that she defended herself from a possible hate crime that could have very well resulted in her getting killed.
Even hate speech is protected speech.
But what I find confusing is that he seems to completely disregard the fact that it was the people of Bangor itself that voted her in.
Why won't this ex-convict take our democracy seriously? Ex-convict? You trying to say someone who broke the law can't run? That I've lost the right? Naturally. Well, it's true. I was in prison for 18 years. But the law says anyone can run, no matter what crimes they've committed. I'm standing here because my application was accepted. If you deny my right to run, then who's really disrespecting the law here? That be you, right, Mr. Law and Order? I never said anything about the law. Oh, so you're admitting the laws aren't always so perfect.
Hey, Richard, if you have a problem with how your community voted this election season, perhaps move somewhere else. Maybe Bangor just isn't for you, much like how Portland wasn't for you either. Given that you live next to the Penobscot River, maybe go for a swim and see where the current takes you. Hopefully it'll take you somewhere that will think more like you, in a watery grave. But that's besides the point. The fact that Richard Ward is mad that someone who did her time in prison won an election is silly, given that his leader, Donald Trump, has 34 counts of felony charges for his crime of sexual assault to multiple women. But maybe rape is okay in Richard Ward's eyes because it was a white Christian who raped those women. So it's good rape in Richard Ward's eyes. But that's just speculation on my part. Let's get back on track here. Part of his Facebook post rambles on about filthy syringes on the sidewalks, calling immigrants rape gangs, and a bunch of lawsuits for the city council telling Ward to shut the fuck up for once. I'm not exactly sure why he lumped all three of those things in the same sentence. The first two things are issues that, in his eyes, are problems with the community. But then he lists lawsuits for crushing free speech, as if the lawsuits themselves are an issue on par with dirty streets and rape gangs. But hey, I've been saying that Richard Ward is a racist Nazi, not that he's a smart one. But then there's the fact that he's making fun of people struggling with addiction. You know, the people who are on the streets with nowhere else to go.
You guys gotta understand something. We've got nowhere to go. I've been on the streets 19 years. I got nowhere to go.
He doesn't propose solutions on that front other than that you should sue the city government because they won't let Ward bitch about woke over and over again. Also, these so-called rape gangs don't exist, and definitely not in Bangor. The closest thing we have to a rape gang was a time Richard Ward posted a picture of homeless people on Facebook. No context was given that this was a member of some rape gang, and you know, there are actual sexual assault survivors and advocates for victims of assault in the area like Mabel Wadsworth Center and Partners for Peace. But Ward never name-drops these groups. Instead, he name-drops the Goyim Defense League, National Alliance, and the New England White Network, the latter of which we will talk more about later. Do you remember when I said that we were going to talk more about that news report? The one where some mysterious person hid Easter eggs with racist bullshit in a local Bangor park, and how in the previous video I speculated that it was Richard Ward who planted the eggs? Well, Richard Ward himself just indirectly told us who laid those eggs for children in the local park. Let's refer to his Facebook post again, where he says, "Flyer neighborhoods with shocking facts supplied by GTVFLYERS.com."
A series of racially charged, false statistics aimed at promoting the idea that black people are the root cause of crime in the United States.
GTVFLYERS.com. I knew it! Richard Ward not only just revealed his power level, but he also just admitted that he is trying to brainwash kids. So now we know that Richard Ward is literally targeting kids in Bangor. Who needs so-called rape gangs when you have a Christian nationalist creep with a camcorder taking unsolicited photos of people all over town? And finally, we need to talk about the New England White Network. These people are former members of the National Socialist Club 131, a Nazi group who were at the Capitol on January 6th. It's important to note that NSC 131 and NEWN are very similar to the Blood Tribe, who are all not from Maine. You could say that each of these groups migrated up here. But much like the Blood Tribe, they will be driven out of Maine too. We don't like their kind around here. All they do is cause trouble and bully vulnerable people. Meet Ryan J. Murdo, a Nazi in the New England White Network who ran an ad in the Fort Fairfield Journal advocating for a book burning. Someone on Reddit shared their experience writing a complaint to the journal, to which they responded with,
"While I do not agree with book burning because it will never bring your adversary over to your side, and do not consider myself a neo-Nazi, because there are too many pieces of that ideology I don't agree with, I do support free speech. I ran his ad because I support free speech, and as far as I know, nothing he is promoting is illegal. That's what free speech looks like, even if we don't always agree with it. If I did not run his ad, then I would be a hypocrite."
Hey moron, book burning is censorship and a violation to free speech. The point of a book burning is to silence the words written on the fucking pages. Again, why are these supposed free speech warriors only active when hate speech is silenced, but when it's time to express dissent against the Trump administration, they're the ones cheering him on? Rhetorical question, of course. Take a look at this post Ryan J. Murdo wrote.
Here are just a few food pantries in Maine. We need this food to be going to Aryan people, not mud invaders. Also, please take pictures of any muds in the area and post them online.
Ryan, a man who is from New Hampshire, not Maine, wants his Nazi followers to go to food pantries and harass people. Think about Trump's recent cuts to EBT and Medicaid, how people are going hungry in the longest government shutdown in U.S. history. This is a man who wants to bully people while they're at their most vulnerable, instead of helping his community. In fact, why the hell is he operating outside of his own neck of the woods? Isn't that hypocritical to be basing your operation outside of Maine and then to go and call people of color mud invaders and muds? But again, I never said Nazis were smart now, did I? Ryan is also threatening Project Relief, an anti-racist mutual aid organization.
We need to start patrolling areas near local food pantries and getting as much food for white families as possible. Mud invaders should not be receiving any food from our food pantries. If you see any invaders in these areas, take pictures of them and post them on social media with as much information about their location as you can. Aryan people need to take back control of their communities.
He is directly advocating for attacking people of color, which speaks volumes for a man who ran for the House of Representatives in 2010 under the Republican ticket and lost. Wow, does that sound familiar to anyone? And remember, this is from the Nazi group Richard Ward says that you should support. Think about that when you hear Ward talk about disability advocacy or justice for unhoused folks. Ward never involves himself in the local mutual aid groups that put themselves last for the sake of people shivering and starving during the Maine winters.
You all take care of me. You all know me. Most of you all know me. I'm French toast.
While our heartless, gentrifying city government continues to use the police state to bully the unhoused community.
So a cop kicks me in the foot? That's assault, by the way. By the way, that's assault. We've got nowhere to go. You guys gotta understand something. We've got rights.
And that's because Richard Ward is a fucking goofball who is too worried about so-called woke.
I believe it's time for real Americans to stand up and stomp out woke leftist terrorists.
But keep in mind that while Ward uses woke and the left to identify his enemies, other Nazis in the area are willing to go as far as to call people mud invaders, and probably worse shit on Telegram that we're likely unaware of. My mission in exposing fascists and their dumb liberal enablers isn't to scare you. It's to get you to organize. Watching Nazis run free, preying on the most vulnerable in our community while spewing nationalist garbage, should light a fire under you. These fascist movements thrive by turning vulnerable people against each other instead of against the ruling class. That's why Richard Ward said, Mark 2026, we return for the State House to defend white working families, the poor, and the disabled against the anti-white regime. He's trying to pit disabled people against one another. And last time I checked, disabled people were among those murdered in the Holocaust. So instead of listening to some wannabe fascist savior, reach out to your local mutual aid networks, disability advocates, and community organizers. Build real, functional, and fearless anti-fascist networks so that people like him have nowhere left to hide, and the rest of us can live free from their poison. Oh, and a message to Dick Wart.
So, what are you gonna do now? Kill yourself? Because that's what I recommend.